Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammed. I am a researcher at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. I would like to welcome you all to this session of the second round of the Arab Graduate Student Conference, which is being held online due to, as you know, to the circumstances of the pandemic. I would like to welcome Fassih, our main speaker. Anas is a PhD student in political science at the University of Alberta in Canada. He is also a research assistant with University of Alberta Future Energy Systems for the project called Assessing Political Pathways for Energy Transition. He holds an MA in International Politics and Security Studies from the University of Bradford. His research interests are international relations of the Third World, critical economics, political economy of development in fragile states, and post-conflict state building. I welcome Dr. Amina Shawahidi too. She is a lecturer at the National School of Trade and Management at Ibn Zohar University in Morocco, and she will be a participant discussant in this session. Before I pass on to Anas, let me kindly remind our Zoom participants that they should click or touch whatever device you are using the right hand icon in order to take part in the discussion. Of course, not literally your hands, your e-hands. As to our audience on social media, you can certainly submit your questions and feedback as comments, and we will gladly take as many as we can during the Q&A session that follows. Questions can be asked in English or in Arabic. Anas is presenting an interesting paper about renewable energy policies in the Middle East and North Africa. The full title of the paper is Transboundary Influences on Framing Renewable Energy Policies in the Middle East and North Africa, a comparison between Morocco and the UAE. Anas, welcome again. You have 20 to 25 minutes, maximum 30 minutes to present your paper, please.
Thanks, Dr. Hemchi, for this introduction. First of all, before starting my paper, I would like to thank the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for this golden opportunity to bring all doctoral students in Western universities, in major Western universities, to get together and share their research and talk about their topics, garner feedback for their future, for the development of their papers and dissertations. This is something, this is a first of its kind, especially when we take into consideration the importance of linking research to society. And I think the Arab Center of Policy Studies is a leading center in the region that tends to strike a balance between empirical and theoretical research. And one kind of empirical research, as we see from the schedules that has been announced by the Arab Center, it is basically empirically focused, which is really important in light of, if we take into consideration the importance of research in the progressive evolution and the development of societies, especially in the Middle East and North African society. So my paper is titled Transboundary Renewable Energy. It's Transboundary Influences on Framing Renewable Energy Policies in the Middle East and North Africa, a comparison between Morocco and United Arab Emirates. So this is I have to say, it's a working paper that stems from a large project, which is my project my doctoral dissertation, it centers on the global governance of renewable energy development in the Middle East and North Africa, taking Morocco and other key countries in the Middle East, like United Arab Emirates, as case studies. So empirically speaking, I draw on ethnographic approaches to global governance, and the purpose is primarily to refine theories of global governance in light of energy development and adopt some sort of methodological rigor drawing on ethnography in this trend of research in international relations. It falls at the intersection between international relations and comparative politics, two subfields of political science that I study, and I think of it as a promising research area that can actually really generate interest from the readership. So I framed this paper through three sections. Like I start with the introduction, and then I move to talk about like the background of renewable energy in Morocco and UAE, and also then the third section would be transboundary energy policies and global governance, and basically the impact of global governance institutions on state sovereignty. State sovereignty is a hot brand in international relations, and thinking of this transboundary energy policies, thinking of energy grids between North African countries like Morocco and Tunisia and the European Union always strike me as something very important to think about when we talk about the sovereignty of these states, especially when we take into consideration that those states are post-colonial states in nature. So then the last section is on the homogenization of energy policies, a post-colonial critique. So over the recent years, some Middle East and North African countries have engaged in the formulation and the implementation of renewable energy policies to address the challenge of climate change, as well as to find an alternative energy source away from fossil fuels and coal. Being the reserve of half of the world's oil and gas, the MENA region is a cornerstone for global energy structure. The international endeavor to transition to a post-oil international society has posed a lot of pressures on the MENA countries and prompt them to seek ways to diversify their energy mix by moving away from the traditional energy source to a new and clean energy source that could potentially feed into greenhouse emission in this region of the world. In addition, the notable decline of oil prices in 2014 struck leading hydrocarbon producers to think of innovative solutions and initiate economic reform programs that rely on renewables as an alternate for oil. However, the attempt to transition to a low-carbon economy in the MENA has not been immune to criticism. Most of this criticism centered on that renewable energy policies have been implemented in both development and developed countries with the help of a series of newly created international institutions governing the energy sector. In this sense, the energy transformation is a mere response of the demand of these new global governance institutions in the energy sector, further feeding into the historically entrenched mode of hierarchy between the West, with its supranational organizations, and the East. In light of this debate, this paper argues that the renewable energy development in Morocco and United Arab Emirates is largely shaped and reshaped by global new energy regimes, such as China and Germany. As such, the creation of Noor Abu Dhabi, Noor Zazat, Noor Abu Dhabi in United Arab Emirates, and Noor Zazat solar station in Morocco is a response to the international expectations, as well as to the internal stakeholders and their institutional arrangements in each country. To understand how energy transition is happening in Morocco and UAE, the imperative is to first and foremost identify the depth of international commitment these countries have to the West, spot out the interests that structure these renewable energy policies, and ascertain whether this energy transition is in the benefit of local communities or it is a response to the colonial European who is deemed to carry the torch of civilization in supporting countries of the MENA in their energy transitions. As such, this paper proceeds as follows. It starts with the background of renewable energy in Morocco and United Arab Emirates. The purpose of this paper, again, is to evaluate transnational policies behind the creation of Noor Abu Dhabi solar plant in United Arab Emirates and Noor Zazat concentrated solar power station in Morocco under the Global Energy Governance Framework. While the former is already set to supply 1,177 megawatts, making it the largest single solar project in the world, the latter, to be constructed in 3 phases, covers a regional area of 2,500 500 hectares with concentrated solar power expected to provide electricity to both Morocco and the EU by 2030. Governmental discourse in both countries offers climate risk mitigation, development, sustainability, self-sufficiency, and the quest for an alternative source of energy other than oil as the main thrust for this energy transition. However, there is growing evidence that the framing of renewable energy policies in both countries is influenced by external superpowers such as China and Germany. In the light of this debate, the purpose is to assess renewable energy policies and UAE, drawing a comparison between the way Chinese and German sustainable energy policies animate the framing of energy transition policies in both countries. The research question driving the paper is what impacts have transboundary policies on state sovereignty? What impacts do transboundary policies have on state sovereignty in Morocco and the EU and the United Arab Emirates? The paper approach is comparative analysis of Morocco and the United Arab Emirates. The national governments of both countries maintain a visible presence in the grand scheme of energy transition in the MENA region. They both have acknowledged the issue of climate risk mitigation as a legitimate responsibility of the state and have gradually engaged in the process of policy making for that end. In the UAE, the impetus for non-Abu Dhabi installation is to proceed to a new environmentally friendly and sustainable source of energy after the country was identified with the highest carbon footprints in the world, and to find an alternative to oil as a response to the depletion of its main generation source, fossil fuels. Likewise, in Morocco, the government uses climate change as a rationale for the expropriation and disposition of the land, while some critiques point to the marginalization of affected communities and governmentalizing, to use Foucault, public opinion bifurcated by the discourse of climate risk mitigation, which places the grassroots communities at the margins of development, arguing that the entire project is a response to the demands of Germany in its project of Energy Wind. Energy Wind is a large project led by Germany to transition entirely from coal and oil to renewable energy. And now, within the scheme of global energy transition and the global governance, Germany is trying to recruit major countries in the developing world to adopt the same policies, to transition to a low carbon economy, and subsequently function as exporters for renewable energy and clean energy. Both Morocco and UAE have showed a strong desire to join the so-called international cause to transition to a low carbon economy, and both countries have stated that this commitment to invest in solar power is an urgent necessity. In Morocco, for example, the energy system faces a myriad of challenges, pushing the Moroccan government to resort to external help to increase its capacity to respond to the demand of energy needs in the country. Because of the country's limit in domestic fossil fuels resources, Morocco depends heavily on the import to cover its energy needs. The country's soaring demographic growth has exacerbated energy poverty in the recent years and fueled the deep increase of energy demand from external resources, serving as a catalyst agent for global energy regimes to animate renewable energy policies in this country. Where else can these regimes invest in solar other than an area endowed with a rich sun desert? The International Energy Agency's comprehensive assessment of the Moroccan energy sector presented a report that states that oil covers 2/3 of energy consumption in Morocco, while biofuels 7%, coal 16%, and natural gas 5%. Likewise, in United Arab Emirates, the country has demonstrated a strong commitment to reduce its dependency on traditional fossil fuels, partly because of oil depletion functioning as an existential threat to the country's energy security. Nor Abu Dhabi plant is a joint effort between the Abu Dhabi government and the Jinko Solar Holding. In a statement by Mohammed Hassan al-Suwaidi, he stated that the completion of the project marks a significant milestone in the United Arab Emirates Energy Strategy 2050, 30 years from now, launched in 2017 to increase the contribution of clean energy in the total energy mix to 50% by 2050, while reducing the carbon footprint of power generation by 70%. This is a very ambitious plan by the United Arab Emirates. While this seems like a strategic plan to diversify the country's energy mix, there is a growing evidence that these renewable energy policies are not homogeneous. They are not exclusively driven by the United Arab Emirates. They don't flow from the bottom up. They flow from the top down. They are not homogeneous. They are transboundary policies that are transferred from Germany in its large project of energy wind and China. With the circulation of these transboundary energy policies from the developed to the developing world, a glimpse on policy diffusion and transfer is warranted. Studies of policy diffusion and transfer have grown exponentially for many reasons. On one hand, the study of diffusion and transfer, the study of policy diffusion would not be possible without taking into account the temporal perspective. Policy diffusion is generally defined as the socially mediated spread of policies across and within the system. The first studies of policy diffusions were descriptive and concentrated on its shape. That is, they described the adoption patterns on the basis of cumulative number of countries that have adopted a given policy by time, ascertaining whether this adoption is slow or rapid across time. Echoing the case of Morocco, it has been evident that Norway is an extension of the energy wind, especially if taken into consideration the kingdom lacks a policy model of energy governance. Morocco is traditionally known as a country heavily dependent on imports of energy. It doesn't have an energy system in place. It doesn't have an already robust energy system to draw on in place. It is dependent on import. And now they have renewable energy development. So they are creating a renewable energy system out of scratch. Whereas in the United Arab Emirates, there is already an energy system in place. Country is one of the largest exporter and producer of oil. There is a renewable and there is an energy system in place. And now they want to gradually replace it or decrease their dependence on the traditional system of energy to a new one while replacing it with a new renewable energy system. So we have two countries. In one, we are applying an energy system out of scratch. There is no energy system in there. And another where there has already been an energy system dependent on fossil fuels and oil on place, and then we are trying to apply another one or replace it with another one. So here is the comparison. Sovereignty has always been an essentially. So then this is like talking of transboundary energy policies, as we see that are coming from both China and Germany in energy wind. Because when we talk about renewable energy development, we talk about three things. We talk about the finance, we talk about the infrastructure, and we talk about policy. So let's take Morocco, for example. The finance does not come from Morocco. The finance comes from the World Bank, from the European Union, from other supranational organizations that help Morocco to transition to a low carbon economy. The policies are not Moroccans. The policies also come from leading countries who have applied these energy systems, who have the technology, who have tested these policies and they worked. So they come from Germany. There is nothing wrong with borrowing these lessons. There is nothing wrong with knowledge transfer, but there is a commitment there. And here, like I'm gonna talk about like transboundary. The reason why I mentioned the state sovereignty is I want to problematize this commitment, because this commitment erodes and trumps state sovereignty in the first place. The commitment of Morocco, of any country in the global south, developing renewable energy projects that is tied to an external country like China or a major power or Germany in terms of finance, in terms of policies, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of knowledge, in terms of policy, in terms of almost everything. Technicians, engineers, they are all external. So I'll give you a little bit glimpse about sovereignty. I know that major of you might be international relations scholars, but I think sovereignty is kind of things clear for you, but I'm gonna give an explanation. Sovereignty has always been an essentially contested concept in the field of international relations and comparative politics. It is contested because it's fluid in meaning and open to change through time, whereas this change is seen vital and historical necessity for the concept to correspond to the transformation of global institutions such as the United Nations. Others see it as an uploaded resistance and endurance of the traditional Westphalian order. The latter, or what is called the Treaty of Westphalia that was put in place in 1648, has been the main reference for the debates on the nature of sovereignty in the modern state. While international relations research focus on the challenges to external focuses on the challenges to the external to states only, prevention from external threats, for example, studies in public policy, policy diffusion, and even comparative politics, and by extension, energy policy, sheds light on both internal and external dimensions of sovereignty. Aware of this major bone of contention among scholars, I shall limit the definition of sovereignty to the authority of independent decision-making within territorial boundaries of a particular state. Applying this to energy transition in the MENA region, it is important to determine how autonomous states are in formulating policies regarding energy transition. The question is then, has renewable energy development provided an opportunity for Morocco to bounce back from the colonial exploitation, or has this transition only further exacerbated state sovereignty being established by the colonizer before leaving the region? Remember, sovereignty has always been established by the colonizer. At some point in time, we did not have Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. Speaking of my region, we did not have this kind of divisions. It was the borders. They were borders created. These are the sovereignty. This is your territory, and then the ruling elite was put there. So then they still govern to date. So aren't we replicating the same thing? Isn't this renewable energy development, this investment of solar, investment in wind, economic model, loans, World Bank, isn't this a kind of perpetuation of what has been going on for years in this region of the world? This is exactly the question that animates my research interest and my project writ large, not only this paper. So for us to look at like coming back to renewable energy, the inch that I'm trying to highlight in my paper is the creation of certain international institutions. So International Renewable Energy Agency, for example, IRENA. The German government has been the main architect behind the formation of IRENA, which was created in 2011 and now includes over 160 member states, most of which are from the global south. In addition, new initiatives to promote international cooperation in the governance of the renewable energy sector have been set, such as Clean Energy Ministerial, the Renewable Energy Policy Network for the 21st Century, and Sustainable Energy for All. Such organizations, speaking of global governance, such organizations deploy non-hierarchical and soft political steering, which involves a combination of sovereignty-bound and sovereignty-free state, that is to say, state and non-state actors. When public-private institutions play significant roles in developing a policy, the boundaries between domestic priorities and sovereignty and foreign interests and international pressures become blurred. So James Rosno is a leading figure, is an authority in global governance, and he talks about the notion of the sphere of authority. So in global governance, we talk about the sphere of authority. We don't talk about the state as the main actor in international relations. We talk about non-state actors as well. And we talk also about institutions, the United Nations, for example, the World Bank, for example, IMF. These are institutions that have a say in global governance. Now, if we have to analyze how the decision flows from the top to the bottom, we have to analyze how these institutions have been created, right? The United Nations were created by the winners of the Second World War II. Speaking this of, again, applying that on renewable energy development, my research, there was renewable energy international organizations like IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agencies, created by Germany. It is clear that created by Germany to recruit 160 member states so far in order to convince them through some sort of mechanisms, through some sort of facilitation to transition to a low carbon economy. So it's a preparation for a future world in which the oil will not matter. So the sphere of authority transgresses the state to include international institutions, non-state actors, and those non-state actors, international institutions, are also steered and manipulated under certain conditions by major power in international relations. And when I say major power, it could be financially, it could be militarily, like talking of Robert Cox, and the global hegemon, like material capability is important, and then ideas. If you are able to dominate ideas, you are a hegemon, like dominating ideas, material capability, and institutions. Three things: material capability, ideas, and institutions. And what Germany is doing in this renewable energy transition, the country is dominating institutions as an institutional arrangement to transition to a low carbon economy And then tomorrow say, well, we are a leading country and we have the knowledge, we have the money, we have the skills, and then we have civilized these people. It's a kind of civilizing mission that the post-colonial talks about. Being able to kind of believe in climate change mitigation and being able to kind of join this efforts to transition to a low carbon economy and then veering away from fossil fuels is a civilization. So Germany is doing this, and also China. China is the leading #1 country in renewable energy development. In the international relations field, the meaning of multi-state agencies like IRENA is highly contested. One view is that, no, there are two views about the creation of IRENA, the United Nations, the World Bank. There are two views. One view is that international cooperation and transboundary interdependencies can produce better policy outcomes for participating states than unilateral actions. In this sense, global governance is to be promoted by hegemonic states in energy security, befitting the German-led global energy regime meant to support countries in the global south in their energy transition. Now the other view advocates for how we, as a global community, including Morocco, can transition from a fossil fuels-based energy economy to a renewable one without reproducing the same conflict, inequalities, and colonial relationships, both internally and internationally, that characterize the old regime. In other words, let us accept that solar is preferable, cleaner, more renewable, less environmentally destructive solution to oil in the long run. Yet that does not solve the problem of how we exactly move to that new energy producing system in a just way. Like the old energy regime, the oil, but we transitioned from coal to, I think there is a very important book for you, like everybody watching or listening, very important book about energy transition by Timothy Mitchell, Carbon Democracy. It's a fascinating book on how he talks about I take a lot of credits from, he takes a lot of credits from my research, to be honest, because he talks about how we transitioned from coal to oil, and that transition was not democratic at all, mainly because of the labor, like the coal used to, we had a lot of employees, like people, the way the coal transition from one country to another, it takes months, and that kind of generated a lot of labor support, and then people were actually happy because they found job. Now oil transition easily. But most importantly, because of the wars that the oil has created. Now, because we are from the Middle East, there is Iraq war, Libya war. So these wars have been primarily precipitated by the quest for oil reserves. So if the old regime has been characterized by this, how about the renewable energy? Once tomorrow we have Morocco as the leading country in renewable energy development and exporting electricity to the European Union, what is the geopolitics stand of Morocco in the future? And then look at United Arab Emirates, a leading country in producing oil. They are trying to transition the largest solar station now, 1,177 megawatts. The largest being built is still in Morocco, but it's not finished. The one in Emirates is already finished. That's the largest, and the country is the major oil power. But they are preparing for that thing that's going to happen, the conflict, because there's going to be some sort of, what kind of conflict? Is a transition to renewable energy policies peaceful? I know this is beyond the paper. I'm just throwing all my ideas. This is my project. I mean, I'm in my second.
Sorry for the interruption. You have 3-4 minutes left.
Yeah, thanks, Mohammed. I'm gonna go directly to the last section, postcolonial critique. So, drawing on postcolonial theory to analyze the policies that motivate the Moroccan and United Arab Emirates energy push and to reveal power relations of dominance between the West, in this case the European Union, with its supranational organizations such as the European Investment Bank and the rest, it is evident that this global energy transition is a perpetuation of the colonial legacy, especially in the case of Morocco. A post-colonial perspective would suggest that foreign and development projects have increasingly been top-down tools for sustaining the regulatory system that reinforces the dependence of the South on the North. Post-colonial theorists would further argue that if these projects are meant to develop communities in the global South, people in Ouarzazate, people in the Emir, people also in Africa, in Ghana, in Ethiopia, if to develop these communities in the global South, we should adopt a bottom-up approach, starting from the grassroots, that focus primarily on people and communities as the center of the development equation. In this case, in the case in hand, energy transition in the Middle East and North Africa is somewhat a typical renewable energy government's idea to be implemented by the West in the Arab world. While this is not immune to criticism, it is welcomed by some actors engaged in policy making in the field. The Middle East as a region embroiled in historically entrenched colonial legacy remains a subject of heated discussion. However, with that criticism entail that any policy model to be applied to another region needs to be genuinely local and autonomous in order for it to have real impact? This is another view. Although it is taken for granted that any policy design applied to another region needs to be critically appraised before applying it to the region, the criticism leveled to the Western policy model is seen by some scholars as not based on solid substance, as the equation that surfaces for most. I'm not trying to contradict myself here, but just the post-colonial critique, this is just laying the foundation for the post-colonial critique. This is what people think, that the West, I mean, you don't have a renewable energy policy. Why don't we like export to you the knowledge, right? But then the proponents of the argument will call for the proponents of the argument that the homogenization and localization of energy policies will call for a deep de-Westernization and decolonization of models of governance writ large in the energy sector. Not only policies, models of governance in the Middle East, and strive to alleviate provincializing Europe in comparative politics. Europe as a province, as a torch of civilization, as a torch of knowledge, the exporter of knowledge, the exporter of ideas, provincializing Europe. This is a thesis by Chakrabarty. In the same line of thoughts, accentuate the state's formation in the rest of the world. So transboundary politics is actually, I'm just going to stop here. So just to wrap up, the attempt in this paper is to try to lay bare the cognitive dissonance of ideas that come from the West in terms of the power, in terms of the finance, the institutions, and also everything that falls under the institutional arrangement to transition to a low carbon economy, to a renewable energy system in Morocco, United Arab Emirates, or any country in the Middle East and North Africa, in order to see what are the power dominants here. But the question is, how can Morocco and the United Arab Emirates, going further, think of a policy model that is homogeneous, rely on themselves in terms of providing for their own, paying for the technicians, like bringing like local laboratories to kind of prepare workforce for this kind of technology, and importantly, having the finance. The United Arab Emirates might have the finance, Morocco doesn't have the finance. So I leave it there. Thank you very much, and I welcome any questions and also feedback if you think that this is something that is of interest to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Anas. Thank you very much for the interesting paper and the excellent presentation as well. I absolutely enjoyed reading the draft. It was insightful, so my comments are going to be on the draft I read more than on the presentation. I think it is one of the few articles which approach renewable energy policies in the third world from a third world perspective and from an IR perspective. When I say an IR perspective, I mean international relations theories. When I say a third world perspective, I mean specifically post-colonialism, which is well elaborated in your work. The paper is really brainstorming, so what I'm going to say are just some theoretical reflections I want to share with you. It is a theory piece. It is not full of details on the technical aspects of renewable energies, and this gave me the opportunity to read it without doing further readings on those aspects, because I'm not really an expert in such a field. I said the paper is theoretical, and this takes me to a quick comment on methodology, not specifically on methodology, but on the structure of the paper, not the presentation. I insist. I think there's a slight lack of harmony between the title and the structure of the paper and its content as well. And as the title promises that the paper draws a comparison between renewable energy policies in Morocco and the UAE, but eventually this promise has not been adequately fulfilled. And I think you have two alternatives in hand. Either you rephrase the title by giving up the subtitle. And I repeat, I'm talking about the draft paper, not the presentation, and not the entire project of your research. I said you can either rephrase the title by giving up the subtitle in order to keep the paper theoretical, or you do the comparison. If you trust my opinion, of course, I would like to recommend the first alternative. On the one hand, because the paper is theoretically well written, and on the other hand, because the second choice requires more descriptive and analytical work. What I mean, if the main title is Transboundary Influence on Framing Renewable Energy Policies in the Middle East and North Africa, the subtitle is Comparison between Morocco and the UAE, then you should provide some answers on a couple of questions about the comparative cases. For example, why Morocco and the UAE? Why not Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Algeria? What are the aspects of comparison? And eventually, what are the results of the comparison? So this is just a quick comment. And if you intend to submit a final version of the paper for publication, I think you should consider that. My first comment, Anas, is on global governance, and as you know, the concept itself is controversial and far from being taken for granted. Despite that, our academic and political discourse continues to use it as a well-established reality. We speak of global governance as one thing, but empirically it is not. And James Rosenow himself argued that we have global governances with S rather than global governance. Yeah. Empirically, global governance varies in some cases very considerably from one issue to another, and in some cases more considerably from one region to another, which makes it less global than what the term promises. And certainly, I think that energy is one of the issues that should be treated much more carefully when we speak of global energy governance. Now, let me say something about the concept of governance itself. And let me refer again to James Rosenow, since he is one of your main references. I think the widely cited title of the book published by Rosenow in 1992, the title was Governance Without Governments. Yeah, I think the subtitle is Order and Change in Global or World Politics, something like this. I think the phrase governance without government in the title is still very relevant to understand what do we mean by global governance. It is how to govern global issues, how to tackle global challenges, not only by governments, not only by governmental actors, but by complex networks that include states and non-state actors. And this is the point. That's how our friends in public policy field use the term. It is about networks of government and its agencies. This is the first one. The second one is civil society. The third one is private sector. We have the three sectors: the public, the private, and the social. And that's how we as IR scholars use the term. It is about, of course, much more complex networks of governments and intergovernmental agencies and organizations, international institutions, multinational corporations, multilateral regimes, and of course, global civil society actors, NGOs. As to the issue of sovereignty, which is at the heart of global governance, the question is, why would the state, as a self-interested, self-helped actor in an anarchical environment, if we use a realist perspective, why would the state freely choose to give up its sovereignty to these institutions and arrangements? The best answer, I think, is the one provided by Daniel Bell. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the name. Many years ago, he said, state has become too small to handle big problems and too large to deal effectively with small problems. And let me refer to William Wallace, of course, not William Wallace of Scotland, William Wallace, the author of The Sharing of Sovereignty. It is an excellent book which was published in the second half of the 1990s after the birth of the European Union. I think this is why we have been witnessing such trends of sharing sovereignty, both locally and globally. Globally, because states need to handle big problems and they are too small, and locally because states need to deal effectively with small problems and they are too large. It's the ability, I think, it's the ability to be effectively sovereign. If you want to be effectively sovereign, if you want to do what you have to do effectively to practice more sovereignty, then you have to give up some of your sovereignty. I think this is the whole idea about sovereignty and global governance, and this is the rationale behind the idea of global governance. And this leads me to my second point. Anas, when you use the notion of global energy governance, what non-state actors you are speaking about? Are they only international institutions? Specifically, I would like to hear something about the role of international companies which work in the field of renewable energies industry. This is very important. And by the way, the role of environmental NGOs, which are active on global warming and climate change, for example, is important too. But let me shed some light on renewable energies industry, because I think it is relevant to one of the gaps in post-colonialist approach to the question. Yeah, I think post-colonialism does not cast enough light on the internal dynamics in making such decisions to create such giant, financially demanding projects. Of course, projects which are far from being consistent with national development priorities, and you are an expert in political economy of development. Shouldn't we think in this context of the internal dynamics of the decision making itself? For example, the personal connections between decision makers and international corporations working in renewable energies industry. I don't really want to use the word corruption, but we should keep it on the table. Isn't there any chance to include, these are not questions, they are just reflections. Isn't there any chance to include what might be called psychological motives of the decision maker himself? I don't know, let's take for التطاول في العمران, for example. I don't mean التطاول في العمران as التطاول في العمران, but when you hear أضخم مشروع في العالم وأكبر محطة في المنطقة and so on and so on. You know what? When I recall what India's energy minister said during the 2015 climate change conference in Paris, he said, development is our priority. To deliver electricity to tens of millions of our citizens is our priority, not fossil fuel depletion or energy transition. When I recall this, I wonder what kind of irrational decisions we are making here in our region. I repeat always, these are just reflections to share with you. My third comment is related to what I have said about the limits of postcolonialism in this regard. What do you think, Anas, of the low politics, high politics, traditional binary in the realist perspective? Don't you think that energy policy is part of low politics, not high politics? And that is why it is called energy policy, not energy politics, in the context of your paper. Isn't it a technical issue and thus shouldn't be politicized, or let me say normativized? I mean, it should be viewed as a question of technical assistance, not a question of recolonization or new colonialism. And you mentioned in the paper and in your presentation as well, technology transfer issues. Finally, and I stop here, I would like to hear, Anas, I would like to hear some more details about institutional Orientalism. الاستشراق المؤسساتي. It is a notion that I really find attractive and I would like to learn more about. Anas, thank you very much for the excellent paper. And as I said, it was really brainstorming and refreshing to my IR mind. Okay, now I would like to hand over to you, Amina.
Maybe maybe I can address your feedback first. Maybe if something that I can address, she will skip it, or you want to give her the floor first.
As you want, as you want.
I can let me address. Just go by just some couple of few points. I know that you just raised very significant points, and then this is something that I'm going to use it for improving on the paper. But I want to highlight some points. So yes, Mohammed, you mentioned the James Rosno main book in 1992, Governance Without Government, and then he talks about global governances. I think this is I'm aware of that literature. And then when we talk about energy, like just to substantiate, this is, you already talked about it, but just to substantiate it in the context of the economic development and renewable energy development in the South. Like if you take, for example, the global governance led by the United States of America is not like the global governance led by Germany. The global governance led by the United States of America and the Trump administration is pro-oil. President Trump does not believe in renewable energy. It is a pure pro-oil, the improvement of the international organizations, the creation of international organizations, shell companies, the facilitation of the trade in oil. So this is the global governance. The global governance led by Germany through institutions is a low carbon economy oriented, if this is structurally correct. And within Germany itself, just to foreground Rosno's global governances, within Germany itself, like the global governance led by GIZ company is not like the global governance led by the International Renewable Energy Agency. So within the dynamics inside, there are differences in policies, and then that's or the global governance led by USAID from the US. So this is Your second point, Mohammed, is fascinating. That's a fascinating question of how, like, institutions and global governance and the finance and the sovereignty, like how do global institutions like the World Bank, how do these institutions prompt state sovereignty? I'm going to answer briefly because I draw on Michel Foucault here, and then I draw in his concept of governmentality. So Michel Foucault basically talked about in his Discipline and Panache, and also The Birth of the Clinic, he talks about three modes of power. One mode of power has always been there, which is the game between individuals. A wants to do that, B wants to do that. They negotiate and then they do one of the things, right? You are my friend, for example. I want to go play football. You're going to want to play tennis, and then we negotiate, and then sometimes you win, sometimes I win. So it is what Foucault talks about. It is what Foucault says. Power is everywhere in everyday life. It is this kind of power that he was talking about. The second mode of power is discipline. And then, so discipline where the situation is so tightly set up, there is no game to play. You can resist, but you cannot change the situation. Are no longer able to play a game, which is the kind of power we find in prisons, we find in assembly lines, we find in hospitals, for example. You are disciplined in a way that you are made into a docile body that can do very little. And then the third mode of power, and this is to answer your question, is governmentality. The governmentality perspective is radically different than the other two modes of power, game between individuals and discipline, in a way that it does not start by putting people under your thumb, but by the orchestration of action, by the socializing people, making them into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And then this global governmentality perspective works in global institutions, and how, for example, the World Bank would deal with Morocco. The World Bank, for example, would lend money to Morocco. Here is like $8-9 billion for renewable energy, like Norway does it. You do that, or maybe they will lend you money for building some sort of schools, or maybe for some sort of hospitals. And then by time, the World Bank can call the head of government, the Moroccan government, or the Minister of Finance, and then they can ask them questions. What are you doing in this? What are you scoring in global governance in terms of this? What are you doing about women? What are you doing about schools? What are you doing about hospitals? So for me, sovereignty is trumped just because by that debt, the global bank lent money for Morocco. They can ask them what they are doing about improving the situation of women, improving the situation of children. So, and then likewise in renewable energy development, once $9 billion was put in Norway like by the European Union and the World Bank and Germany and other countries, that means at some point in time, they can literally ask Morocco, what are you doing about this? And what are you doing? Yeah, I think this is the 2 points that I wanted to highlight. Yeah, thank you so much for this. I'll keep this in mind, like in the promo of the paper, and of course, we're going to keep in touch.
We will have a great and fruitful exchange, Anas. So I pass on to Amina. Amina, 15 minutes. Okay, thank you.
أنس يعني فيليسيتاسيون لأن يعني موضوع مهم جدا وأنا قرأته بتمعن، خاصة أنك حضرتي على موضوع الطاقة وكمشروع نوروزازات الذي هو أحد أكبر محطات الطاقة الشمسية بالعالم ويساهم في التحويل الطاقي بإفريقيا تحت رعاية صاحب الجلالة محمد السادس. فهذا المشروع الرامي إلى تزويد إفريقيا بالطاقة مع الحفاظ على البيئة يساهم على إرساء أساس النمو المدمج وأخضر بالقارة. فالمغرب كذلك يطمح إلى زيادة حصة الطاقة المتجددة في المزيد إلى 52% في حدود سنة 2030 ويسعى إلى تحقيق تحول طاقي يركز على تنمية الطاقات المتجددة بهدف وضع قدرات إنتاجية إضافية للكهرباء بإجمال 6000 ميجاوات من مصادر الطاقة الريحية والمائية والشمسية التي توفرها المملكة المغربية. وكذلك الإشارة أن المغرب ومن خلال إطلاق البرنامج الطاقة الشمسية نور في 2009 خطط الخطط الإنتاج طاقة إضافية لا تقل على 2000 ميجاوات من الطاقة الشمسية في سنة 2020. كذلك المركب الطاقة الشمسية نور أول مشروع تم إنجازه في إطار هذه الاستراتيجية الطاقية، كما يعتبر المركب الذي تصل الطاقة الإنتاجية إلى 580 ميجاوات موزعة على 4 وحدات مركزية من بين أكبر المحطات الشمسية في العالم. والمغرب اليوم يزود ما يقارب حوالي 1,000,000 مغربي بالكهرباء وتفادي انبعاث حوالي 1,000,000 طن من الغازات الدافئة في الجو. وكذلك يذكر أن المغرب كان من مقارنة ولا تعتمد على الشركات بين القطاعات العام والخاص. فأنا سوف أرجع إلى النقطة التي ذكرتها في البحث ديالك والتي أثارت الانتباه كالتالي: هل أتاح تطوير الطاقة المتجددة فرصة للمغرب للتعافي من الاستغلال الاستعماري، أم أن هذا الانتقال أدى إلى مزيد من التفاقم سيادة الدولة التي أنشأها المستعمر قبل مغادرة المنطقة؟ يعني هل كان إسقاط الاستعمار، هل باقي لحد الآن إسقاط الاستعمار؟ وكما أن اليوم أنه ينتج هذه تطوير الطاقة المتجددة فهي ستين غيشة، يعني فهي شيء مهم للبلد. ولكن سؤالي هو على هذا الغرار، كيف للمغرب؟ لأنه يتطلع في حدود 2050 للإنتاج، يعني إنتاج الطاقة وبالأسماء يعني تسويق. كيف أن هذه العملية التسويق ممكن تم على المملكة المغربية، خاصة من مجال الطاقة المتجددة، وخاصة لما نتحدث على الإدارة وعلى طريقة الحكم الرشيد وعلى كذلك الشفافية في هذا المصدر، خاصة أنك تكلمت على بعض النقاط من أن ورزازات خدت المشروع نور بورزازات خدا كمية ضخمة من الأموال، وبغينا نعرفوا يعني هاد الأموال يعني أو هذا المشروع ماذا سيضيف للمغرب في عملية التسويق الذي يتطلع له في عام 2050. أنا كنشكرك بزاف، شكرا أنس لهذا البحث، أتمنى لك التوفيق لأنه بحث مهم، ونحن كمغاربة يعني نفتخر بهذا المشروع الضخم في ورزازات، ولكن أود منك أنك توضح لنا بعض هذه النقاط، وشكرا.
أنس؟
نعم، شكرا أمينة على المداخلة. فأشكرك جزيل الشكر على وقتك لقراءة ورقتي، وأنا أيضا استمتعت بورقتك أيضا. فيما يخص ماذا سيوفر هذا المغرب، طبعا هو مجال، إذا تحدثنا عن الطاقات المتجددة وربطها بالسيادة، فهي طبعا هي يعني ستعود على المغرب بمنافع كثيرة إذا استعملت هذه الطاقة في صالح المغرب. لكن الإشكال الذي المطروح هو أن المغرب كونه يعني بلدي كبلد نامي، لم هي الأموال التي صرفت على هذه الطاقات المتجددة هي ليست من الخزينة المغربية، فهي أموال تم أموال من الخارج. وأيضا السياسات هي سياسات خارجية تم نقلها من ألمانيا هي كبلد رائد يعني، وليس هناك أي مشكل في ذلك. فألمانيا بلد رائد في الطاقات المتجددة، فهو يعطي دروسا للمغرب وغير المغرب، فأعطى دروس كثيرة، فالمغرب أخذ درس. فبالرغم من أنها هي طبعا المغرب، على فكرة هناك أيضا شيء أقوله على المغرب في قضية نور ورزازات. هناك المغرب مؤخرا فقط بعض القرى لم يكن لديها كهرباء، الآن تقريبا كل القرى في المغرب لديهم كهرباء يعني. هذه المغرب قفزة نوعية في الكهرباء، وحصل اكتفاء ذاتي في الكهرباء عن طريق الطاقة المتجددة، اللي هو شيء يعني لم يحصل في تاريخ المغرب من قبل، وذلك بسبب يعني جلالة الملك محمد السادس هو من صعد بالمغرب في هذه الطاقات المتجددة فتحصل. لكن الاقتصاد المغربي غير الكهرباء، الاقتصاد في الدار البيضاء واقتصاد لا زال يعتمد على الكول وعلى الغاز وعلى الأويل. فنحن نتمنى أن هذه الطاقات المتجددة تغطي أيضا الاقتصاد وليس فقط الكهرباء في المستقبل، وأنا متفائل كثيرا على أن هذا سيحصل. المغرب سيصير، والمغرب أيضا هناك شيء آخر، أيضا المغرب أيضا يعطي دروس لإفريقيا. الآن مثلا بعض الدول في السب صحراء أفريقيا هم يأخذون دروس من المغرب، ويأخذون كيف المغرب أنه تعلم بالاتحاد الأوروبي بطريقة قوية جدا، بطريقة سريعة، وأنجز أكبر طاقة في طور الإنجاز، أكبر طاقة شمسية في العالم. فهو الآن يعطي دروسا قوية لشمال إفريقيا والشرق الأوسط، وخصوصا لإفريقيا جنوب الصحراء، إفريقيا الصحراء، لأن هناك هي الطاقة الشمسية تعتمد على المنابع الطبيعية وهي الشمس. فهي قد يظن البعض بأنها ليست شيء، لكن هي شيء مهم جدا في هذه الثروة يعني الطاقية. فالمغرب يعطي دروس في هذه الترانزيشن، في هذه النقلة. وشكرا جزيلا على الفيدباك وعلى قراءة في ورقتي.
شكرا أستاذ أنس. وهناك كذلك المشروع يعني الطاقة المتجددة في بوجدور والعيون وميدلت، وكذلك نعتمد على الرياح وعلى الغوسيكلابل وعلى الماء كذلك. فالمغرب له عدة طاقات، نتمنى وأنا كذلك متفائلة معك، نتمنى أنه يكون الطاقات المتجددة تغطي جل احتياجاته. وشكرا وبالتوفيق في المشروع ديالك.
Okay, thank you very much, Amina. Thank you, Anas. Maybe unsurprisingly, we have no feedback from our attendees, maybe because it is the end of the day. So if you have something to add, something to expand on from your paper, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mohammed. It's an immense pleasure again to be here today. I mean, this conversation, we could have had this conversation in Doha, in Qatar, but because of COVID-19 did not happen, which is very, very unfortunate. And yeah, as I said, this is part of a larger project, my PhD dissertation, and the ambition in my PhD is in addition to some sort of empirical insights into like fieldwork in where's that, I'm also trying to make some sort of methodological innovations and theoretical contribution. So theoretical contributions are actually basically in the area of global governance and also like Foucault, Gramsci, and also post-colonial theory, and how to link them to energy transition. I mean, there isn't much literature about this. So there is kind of theoretical innovation. And most importantly as well, this is a journey for me to come up with a methodological contribution. And in my methodology in Norway, I'm going to do some ethnography with the communities surrounding solar installations. So in international relations, or like in global governance, and by extension in international relations, we don't have much ethnography as a methodology for international relations at all, except some studies in peace studies. Like in peace studies, they live with peaceful societies and they document their peacefulness. And then other than that, we don't have. So if I can establish that link of doing an ethnographic approach, ethnographic research to global energy governance and linking that to global governance international relations, I believe this is going to be a novel contribution. And I know that it's a challenge, it's a huge challenge, but it's feasible. So this is my optimism.
Thank you, Anas. I have a question from the Q&A space in Zoom. Walid asks, what is your contribution for alternative energy in business? Understanding the issue can help in employing techniques to draw more attention to the importance of using green energy and services to protect our environment. So you can read it from the Q&A in Zoom, Anas. Go ahead.
Okay, from the audience, thanks Walid for the question. My contribution to it's not necessarily my contribution, but the discourse surrounding the global governance of renewable energy it's environmentally friendly. And then if we in the industry if we can achieve a full transition from a carbon economy to a low carbon economy, or what we call the post-oil international society, that is going to be an environmentally friendly move, and businesses are going to function as much as they are functioning now, or maybe better. So renewable energy can actually has the capacity of generation to keep the ball rolling and also to keep the oil in the machine, I mean, so to speak. I mean, there is this optimism that if we transition, and also like the studies that are done, and then this for the plan to transition to a low carbon economy internationally, businesses are taken into consideration, because businesses, industry is the main consumer of energy. It's not electricity. The main consumer for electricity is the industry. So thinking of transition to an energy system requires first and foremost thinking of meeting the needs of the industry. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Anas. So since we don't have further questions, I think it's time to end the session. I want to say that tomorrow we have two sessions, two panels. The first one is on Palestine studies. The second one is on history. And the session of Noor Arafat is cancelled and is replaced by Khaled Antawi paper. At the end, I would like to thank you again, Anas and Dr. Amina, for their very interesting contribution, and our participants as well as social media audience. Enjoy your evening, of course, your evening in the East and your afternoon in the West, particularly for Anas.
It's morning. It's 10:26 minutes.
Okay, that's it.
I woke up at 5. I woke up at 5 a.m. today for the testing, and I was like, okay, it's my first time waking up at 5 since the pandemic started.
So enjoy the rest of the day. See you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Thank you so much for the feedback. I had a look at your research. You are also doing global.
Yeah, of course. Look, Anas, I'm looking forward to keep in touch with you and make some what I expect to be valuable exchange. I have a chapter on the complexities of global governance. So I will be glad to send you the full text of the dissertation, which I was defended 3 years ago successfully. Okay, so see you on at the coming conference sessions, which will continue until August the 20th. Keep safe and Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.